What I'm going to be doing is just telling you my story, a little bit about the companies I've been involved with and about myself, some of the lessons I've learned along the way, and hopefully they'll be helpful to you as you look at your own entrepreneurial activities. I'm going to try to leave some time for questions at the end, so keep those questions as we go along. So this is really my story. I grew up in Ohio and Michigan, Benton Harbor, Michigan. I went from there to Yale, where I got a bachelor's in history. From there, I went to a bank and was a banker for a couple of years as my first job. Came back to business school. In business school, I saw a demonstration of an Apple II. It was very early back then, and I got quite excited about the promise of personal computing. I managed to get myself a job with Apple and went to Apple for the next 10 years, 6 or 7 years of which was with Apple itself, and then 3 years with Apple's software subsidiary Claris, which was an attempted spin-off from Apple. When Apple bought it back in, I decided to leave. I have a history of unsuccessful spin-offs, which we'll come back to. So I decided to leave, and I decided to actually take a year off. So I went from Claris to Paris, because it sort of made sense, and studied French. So that's what I did for a year. And over the course of that year, I thought a lot about what I really wanted to do. And when I came back, I was pretty sure what I wanted to do was build a company. I'd been a part of this amazing experience at Apple over the prior 10 years, very early in personal computing. And I wanted to find what was going to be next and build a company. And I knew I wanted to do that with great people, and I wanted to do it with products that really mattered. I didn't want to do it with something small or niche-y. I wanted to do it with something that would have a great impact. And I fortunately, along the way, met this guy, Jeff Hawkins, and he had just started Palm, and we agreed to team up with Palm in founding Palm in 1992. That's the whole company when I joined it in 1992. You may not recognize me. I'm the one in the middle with a little bit more hair and a little bit fewer pounds in the blue dress, and a little hard to pick me out there. But that was the entire company when I joined Palm in 1992. And Palm was really formed with the idea that handheld computing would be the next generation of computing, and that it would be structured similar to personal computing. There would be hardware players, an operating system vendor, application software suppliers, and so on. And our role was to be the application software supplier. So we set out to be the Lotus of handheld, if you will, doing application software for everybody else's handheld computers that were going to be a big part of this business. And Jeff had already lined up Casio to build the thing, Radio Shack to sell it, GeoWorks was the OS, Intuit, AOL were involved. So boy, I thought I just had it made. This was like the hard work was done. We were going to ship this thing and we'd all become rich, and that would be the end of it. So that was the idea when we started Palm in 1992. The vision has been the same consistently over many years, which is that handheld computing is the future of personal computing. Not to say that personal computers go away, but that they're not very personal. And that truly personal computing, on-person computing, you take with you wherever you go, handles your personal as well as your professional data. That would be the domain of handheld computing, not what we view as desktop computing or enterprise computing. And that each generation of computing has been substantially different from the prior generation, and that's involved an opportunity for new leaders. And in each of these generations of computing, the old leaders have never been the leaders in the next generation. So we felt that this was an opportunity for new leaders to emerge in the domain of handheld computing. I have to just take a brief commercial here as I talk about the history of computing. As Garth mentioned, I'm on the board of the Computer History Museum. Many of you may not have visited there, and I urge you to, because studying the history of computing these multiple generations is a wonderful way to understand the future. If you want information about that, it's at computerhistory.org, and there's regular tours that go on there. So please go and do that. That's my brief commercial break. So this was the vision as we started this industry, as we started Palm. Now, there were interesting other players in the market at this time. Apple specifically was bringing along the Newton. Now, this is John Scully's quote. All kinds of different industries will be involved to create what we think will be an industry by the 21st century that will be over $3 trillion. So this set the bar rather high. In fact, if you look at that picture on the top, I keep this here because this is a picture of a book. This book was called Defying Gravity. And what the Newton team did was they hired some journalists and photojournalists to travel with them as they went through their exploits to chronicle the making of this big new industry and publish this book, Defying Gravity, The History of the Newton. I kept this book on my table for many, many years. I felt it perhaps would have been better titled Defining Arrogance than Defying Gravity. And I still have it to this day. I would have brought it to show you, but it was on the high shelf. I also brought, couldn't reach it. I also brought a Newton along in case you haven't seen one of these in a while. Because, it's amazing now to look at it. At the time, it seems small. But anyway, that was the Newton. So here we were. We had all this sort of interesting hype stuff going on in this category. And so we created sort of a symbol for this, which was this disc that hung on our bulletin board at Palm. And it had these two sides. And it had one of those arrows that spun around. And every now and then you'd come in and give it a good spin. And this came from John Scully. We felt he sort of referred to this as the mother of all markets. And in response, Andy Grove called it a pipe dream driven by greed. I'm not sure I know what a pipe dream is, but I have a feeling it's not very good. And and depending on what our mood was any given day or what the press said or what was going on, we would move the arrow to the right half of the circle. So at this stage, everybody's very optimistic. This is going to be a huge market. John Scully said so. It's the mother of all markets. So in 1993, we brought out our first product called the Zoomer. Now, I brought a Zoomer, too, so that I could be fair here. So this is a Zoomer, so equally petite as the Newton. And the Zoomer was this collaboration of all these companies that worked together, and it shipped in 1993. It turns out it was big, as you saw. It was slow, in spite of its name, Zoomer. It was expensive, $699. One thing I learned from our Radio Shack colleagues in those days is they urged you to get products under $500. They called that under the two-spouse decision. You want to stay under the two-spouse decision. So we were over the two-spouse decision. And we sold about 10,000 of these. Now, I think if you went out into the channel, you'd find still about 9,000 of them out there if you're interested in owning one. You can do so. I bought that one. I actually didn't have any. I bought that one on eBay for $10. So that was the Zoomer. So, the Zoomer was a failure. That was our failure. But we learned an awful lot from the Zoomer, as you do from most failures. I understand you just had a panel about failure, and you learn an awful lot from that. And we immediately started working on Zoomer 2 because we'd learned so much from that. So we started doing all the software for Zoomer 2. We were about halfway through the Zoomer 2 project when Casio informed us that they had absolutely no intention of ever shipping Zoomer 2. So we were sort of stuck without any business whatsoever. So we dabbled in a few things. We did some connectivity software for other people's handhelds. We did graffiti, which was a unique way of doing handwriting recognition. We did that on everybody else's handhelds as well. But we fundamentally didn't have a business. So one day we went in to see our venture capitalist, Bruce Dunleavy, and we were telling him about how upset we were that our partners wouldn't work with us. Casio wouldn't do this. GeoWorks wouldn't do that. I mean, we were basically fetching, for those of you who know what that means. And we went in and we were saying this, and he basically looked at us and said, you know what, I'm sick of you guys complaining. If you're so smart and you know what to do, why don't you just go do it? And that was sort of one of those change your life moments where we sat back and said, well, what would that be? And Jeff, specifically my partner, went back to say, what would he create, knowing everything that he'd known, if he didn't have any constraints and any things to rely on with these partners and all that stuff, what would he create given what he had learned? And he came back the next day with this little wood model. The code name for this product became Touchdown. I'm the hand model here, but this is a little wood model with a pasted-on screen. And he basically designed what ultimately became the Palm Pilot. And he did it with the right stack-ups. He did it, he figured out exactly what it had to be. And he did it without any sort of thoughts as to what partners would or wouldn't want, just what he thought about relative to the market. And the key criteria that he outlined were, first of all, shirt pocket size. And he measured man's shirt pockets to make sure that it could fit in a shirt pocket. It had to be designed around synchronization. One of the things we'd learned from the Zoomer One experience was 100% of the people bought our connectivity software to the desktop. And Walt Mossberg was really one of the inspirations for this. He wrote in one of his columns in the Wall Street Journal, if 100% of the people buy this, why isn't it included? This is a fundamental part of the product. And we realized that indeed it was. And so we decided that this had to be designed around synchronization. In fact, a lot of people, I think they've got misimpressions of what made the Palm Pilot successful, but I would argue this was probably the most important point. Instead of being a standalone PC that tried to do everything a PC did, this was suddenly a window onto your PC, a companion for your PC. It shared all the data with your PC. And that was really the breakthrough notion of the Palm Pilot. It had to be easy to use. And when I say easy to use, I mean in comparison with paper, not in comparison with the Newton or the Zoomer. We would do tests to see, could you look up a phone number as fast as you could in your paper diary? That was what our test was. And finally, well below the two-spouse decision, $299. I just have to briefly tell you a quick story about the code name Touchdown. I named the code name Touchdown. I'm very proud of that. That's why I want to tell you about it. So we talked. That's the only code name I've ever given that ever stuck. But so we decided to do this device, which was certainly a surprising decision for what had been a software company, and we had absolutely no hardware engineers at that point. And so we called it the device. Then we got that shortened to TD, and then I said, oh, well, that would be good as Touchdown. Now, Jeff, my partner, he objected to this. He's not a sports fan, and he really didn't like the idea of it being called Touchdown. So until one day when he realized when it touched down in the cradle, then it was okay. It could be called Touchdown. So I just want to tell you this story to let you know what it's like to work with a genius, okay? That's what it's like. So Touchdown was the code name of the product. And that's when I learned lesson number 1, which is, by the way, I have 5 of these if you want to keep track. If you're bored, you want to know where we are in the speech, okay? There's 5 of them. Some of them go faster than others, though, so have hope. So lesson number 1, and this is sort of obvious. Everybody tells you this, but it's so true. It's really all about the team. We set out to create hardware, application software for the desktop, application software for the device, synchronization software, a whole operating system, an enormous amount of work with 28 people. And we did that with pretty much 28 people. And you say, how can that be? And I'll tell you 2 things. First of all, it was the right 28 people. One guy wrote the whole Palm OS. One guy wrote the whole application suite on the device. One guy wrote the whole synchronization architecture. I mean, literally, it came down to that kind of those kind of star employees. And the other thing that I'll tell you about that is that we used a lot of partners. But instead of partnering the way we had before, where it was sort of collaborative, we were in control. We basically asked people to do various pieces for us and manage them closely. And that's why it all hung together. So the Palm Pilot was really designed as a highly integrated hardware and software design. But it was with very, very few people. Now, while we had 28 people, 27 of them were dealing with the product, and I was out trying to raise money for the product and to bring the product to market. And in this environment, suddenly things are looking sort of bad. In fact, I've added up about $1 billion of losses between things like the Newton and EO and Go and Simon and Zoomer and all these things. Well, actually, I brought a Simon to show you because that's sort of amusing, too. Hang on. This is Simon. This was a phone done with IBM and Bell South, okay? Just thought I'd show you that, you know, to give you a sense of the state of the business at the time. So there was about $1 billion of losses, and I went around trying to raise money in this environment. And indeed, things are not looking very good. I learned lesson 2 at this point. You can't row straight with only one paddle. If you row with one paddle, you go in circles. If you want to go straight, you have to row with both. What does this mean? I made the mistake at this point of going around looking for money in sort of a serial fashion. Very quickly, the venture community let us know they were not interested in funding this. You have to remember, this is around the Netscape IPO. The Internet's getting hot. I mean, this stuff's passé. We're walking back in and saying we're doing hardware, and everybody's going, you've got to be kidding me. Go somewhere else. So very quickly we wrote off the venture community. But the corporate investors were more interested. So we spent a lot of time with them. But those were the ones that I mistakenly spent serial time with. So I would spend 6 months with Compaq before they finally told me no. 6 months with Motorola before they finally told me no. I mean, one after another. If you're interested in the details of all these, I can recommend the book my colleague Andrea Buter wrote, which is called Piloting Palm, where she goes into great detail about this period of time. But effectively, we went one after the other and didn't end up with anybody willing to finance the Palm Pilot until we met these crazy guys from Skokie, US Robotics, and they got excited about it. We figured that they didn't know about these $1 billion of losses. In fact, we always insisted on going to Skokie for our meetings because we were afraid if they came to California, they might find out about the $1 billion of losses. So we met these guys, and they thought this was really exciting. They thought this was an amazingly cool idea. And they were really worried. Their business was these modems. Modems were going on the motherboard. They knew their business was going to be vanishing. So this looked like a big new business opportunity, and they decided that they wanted to acquire us. I remember going to lunch with the guy who bought us, John Zakin, who said, you know, how are we going to sell 1 million of these in the first year? We went, oh, no, John, you don't understand this market. Let me tell you about this market. The biggest product in this market to that date has been the HP 100LX. It's sold about 100,000 units a year. That's our goal, 100,000 units. We want to do as well as the biggest player has been in this market. And he looks at us and says, you guys are nuts. You're going to sell 1 million of these things. And in the end, he was closer to the right number than we were, which I'll come back to. But just roughly speaking, in our first year, we sold about 350,000, but by 18 months, we'd hit 1 million. So he was a lot closer than we were. But we had been so beaten down at that point, we no longer could imagine that kind of a success. And US Robotics came in, and they decided they wanted to buy the company, and they were extremely enthusiastic about it, so we agreed to do that. Of course, people ask me many years later, don't you regret having sold to US Robotics? I say, of course, I would have rather not sold the company, but we needed to finance it somehow. So it was a financing. We operated very independently, and they did provide the financing for us to bring this product to market. So in the end, it was the way to get the product to market. What's funny, of course, at the time, nobody knew about the Palm Pilot. They knew us as the failed Zoomer provider and the graffiti software people and so on and so forth. US Robotics bought Palm for $44 million. People called in great numbers to congratulate me for having dumped this dog of a company on these unsuspecting guys in Skokie for $44 million. Of course, later, after we were a big hit, everybody called and told me what an idiot I was that I'd sold the company. So it all depends on your perspective, right? So we sold the company in 1995, operated as a subsidiary in 1996. We shipped the first pilot. We met our goals. It was shirt pocket sized. It was built around synchronization. It was very easy to use, competed well with paper, and it was $2.99. And we started shipping this product, and we saw in our first few months sort of classic early adopters. I think I read every reg card. It was like 10,000 units a month for the first few months, 90% male, between the ages of 35 and 45, self-rated computer experts. You know, when you ask that question about how would you rate your computer expertise, low, medium, high, whatever, everybody, top of the line. Any of you guys here, my early adopters who bought this product? Yes, they're always proud of themselves. See, they raise their hands. They're tremendous. So, these guys, they would actually call me sometimes to complain about something. They'd say, I bought this thing and I've recommended it to 12 friends and this thing happened and you owe me this. And I'd say, look, I don't owe you anything, You're an early adopter. You decide to play that role. That's your job. Your job is to make these products or break these products. Look, Gladiator, they can kill you. And you're doing your job. And they're like, yeah, you're right, you're right. So nobody minded that. But what happened with these early adopters, there's about 50,000 of them. You can sell 50,000 of almost anything in this country. There's about, except for Zoomer maybe, but 50,000 of them. And so these 50,000 guys principally became our sales force. And they went out and they sold this product to everybody else. We did not, they did. We did not have a big budgets for advertising. We did not go out, broad-based communications. this early adopter community went and told everybody they knew that this was a great product, and they started selling this product. And we saw things pick up and get better and better, and then as we got into the holiday seasons, things really took off. We became the most rapidly adopted product in the history of consumer electronics at that time. This has been, I think, superseded since then by CD players and digital cameras, but at the time it was on a just incredibly rapid adoption curve. It became a hit. I started getting all this press. I like this bottom one here. This is Benton Harbor High School grad. This is my hometown newspaper. I became something I never anticipated in my career, which was a cover girl. We had became a part of sort of the vernacular, so let me read this to you. It's a little hard to read. This is so cool. I'm flying this thing completely on my Palm Pilot. A little racier for an extra $50. I'll let you show me your Palm Pilot. We started showing up in everything. We started showing up. This is a paper palm, paper pad. This is a palm candy. We started showing up in all sorts of things, really becoming sort of the symbol for being cool and high-tech. Cool being another thing I never expected to be in my career. But so things are now looking good. Things are looking up. But there's, of course, trouble on the horizon because you know who is coming. We've heard it over and over. As soon as it's successful, Microsoft's going to come. They're going to win. So Microsoft starts to come in and try and do products in this space. And they tried, and they tried. And they were not succeeding at these products in this space. So there's this little thing in the industry. Everybody says Microsoft always succeeds on the third time. Don't believe that, okay? That's not true. They certainly did it in this space. I have to say they've been a lot more successful in the last couple years than they had been through this whole period. But everybody who said any moment they're coming in, and there was some of the analysts, I would love reading these reports, they would literally show the charts, and they'd show it forecasted out how Palm was, 90% of the market today, but in 2 years, Microsoft would own it all, and that would be the end of it. But it just didn't happen. So that we kept an eye on them, but it didn't happen. So then one day I got a call from my boss at US Robotics to tell me that the next day it was going to be announced that 3Com was acquiring US Robotics. Obviously, that huge amount of due diligence on the Palm part of the business shows how important of a strategic part we were to this acquisition. So I started lobbying from that day, actually, to spin out Palm into a separate entity. I'd been having my struggles with USR management. We had a lot of disagreements about strategies for the product, things like where to announce it and how to treat it and all these things. And they kept thinking it was like a modem. And other than the fact that it came in roughly the same size box, I didn't think there were a lot of similarities. So I had been really struggling with them, and I had really gotten to the point where I was ready to quit every time I was in Skokie, and I would say, no, wait till you get home, and 24 hours after I was home, I was fine, but it was a very rugged time for me. So this came, and I was actually sort of pretty pleased about the 3Com acquisition, a California company, but I felt that we really didn't belong there. These were two networking companies. They were about totally different things than we were about. It was going to be a mess to combine them, and they needed to let this thing that was growing so fast have a life of its own. And they said, no, sit down, we're busy, go back to work. So I did. I tried lobbying for a year. I started running into trouble operating Palm under 3Com's management, partly because 3Com started running into trouble. So this is what 3Com looked like leading into the acquisition. Big growth, doing very well, very promising. They do the acquisition. Things are starting to slow a little bit, and all of a sudden I start getting those notes about how, everybody's got to cut their budgets, cut 10%. And I'd go back and I'd say, no, we're really growing fast. You don't want to cut our 10%. And they'd say, Donna, you're really not a team player here. And it was true. I was not a team player. I really wanted Palm to succeed. That was my number one objective. I felt the cut should be a little more strategic, too. I felt like you should cut certain things and not other things, but this was not widely shared. And so I started running into issues with my 3Com management and decided to leave, which I'll come to next. But just to show you what happens after that, you get a sense of what happens with 3Com after this point in time. So I left with Jeff, and we started over in 1998. We started what became Handspring, another company. Our friend Guy Kawasaki lent us that little Victorian office, and then we got the office up on California Avenue. I rented 3 desks. Jeff bought a plant. You can see it there. And we were back in business. Now, at this point, inevitably, I know a lot of you out there are saying, I don't get it. How could they let these two leave without a non-compete? That just seems crazy. So I need to explain to you a moment that we actually ended up with a explicit compete as opposed to a non-compete. One of my biggest points of strategic differentiation, difference of opinion, with both US Robotics and 3Com management was this issue of licensing the OS. So we'd created the Palm OS. They felt we should license it broadly. We felt we should license it very narrowly to complementary partners who could expand into new markets. They felt this was my Apple point of view, and that would doom us to the same fate as Apple. And so I was constantly in arguments about the strategic treatment of the OS as an asset. And so they felt it should be broad license. So when we left, we went to them and we said, look, if you're so keen on broad licensing, then we'll take one of those licenses, okay? You can start with us. We'll license the OS, and we'll pay you royalty for it. And we did. We entered into a license agreement, and we paid them a royalty on every unit we sold, and worked out fine. They subsequently did exactly one other broad license, Sony, and then when their market share got down to about 50%, they decided to stop doing broad licenses and move to a complementary licensing strategy where they licensed people who had complementary products as opposed to competitive products. So, very interesting shift. Anyway, so we started over with Handspring. We got a license to the Palm OS, and was a little easier to find money the second time. This is happened to be having lunch with that same Bruce Dunleavy the next day after we quit. And he showed up with this $3 million check made out to Hawkinski Devices, Inc. We learned lesson number 1 all over again, and a few of our colleagues from Palm came with us to Handspring. Just a few people. Just that guy who wrote the whole OS, the guy who wrote all the application software, the guy who did the design of the user interface, the guy who did all the original electrical engineering, the VP of marketing, and the VP of manufacturing. That's all. And we started over with that team. A lot of people, of course, ask me, come on, that's crazy. You must have had a non-solicitation. I said, of course I had a non-solicitation. I did not solicit these people. They were calling us. They came to us, and slavery was banished a long time ago, so they're allowed to do that. And they came to us in great numbers and wanted to come work with us again. It got to the point where it was getting so awkward hiring those people. I started telling people, look, you're an employee of Palm. I can't even talk to you. And then they'd call the next day and say, I quit, boss. So it's a great team. And we decided when we started Handspring to do work on the different side. When we left Palm, we had just finished the Palm 7 and the Palm 5. And so we'd innovated on the high end, but we'd left the low end a little bit alone. So when we got to Handspring, we said we got to do something on the low end. So we came out with our first product called the Visor. The Visor was less expensive. It was fun with colors. But it was most distinguished by this expansion slot that we called the springboard slot that you could plug into all sorts of modules. And one of the reasons for that was to differentiate it. But probably one of the biggest reasons was at this point when we started Handspring, we knew communications would be very important. We hadn't known that at Palm. We'd sort of learned that at Palm. But by Handspring, we knew this was going to be fundamental. But we knew we didn't know anything about it, and we needed to learn about it. So a lot of the idea was about behind the slot was to be able to create lots of different modules that would plug in, that would be our education about communications technologies. And we were very successful at that. We had plugins that did GSM phones, CDMA phones, reflex pagers, Wi-Fi, just about everything. We had plug-in cards that did that. So we learned an awful lot from that. So after we left, and coincidentally, very coincidentally, on the day we announced the Visor, Palm announced that they were going to be spinning off Palm after all. So that was a year and 5 CEOs later that they made that decision. And I still believe it was the right thing for them to do people ask, of course, well, if they'd promised to spin it off, then would you have stayed? And, I say, well, it was sort of the opposite. It's like if we had stayed, they wouldn't have needed to spin it off. So, it just was one of those catch-22s. So now Palm has gone off and they're independent. We start shipping the visor, and we run into a speed bump of our own. We had been creating this great website. The web is just starting up and getting exciting. We created this great website that was going to be all of our order processing. We were going to be a new Dell-aged company, and the visor was ready, and the website wasn't. And we went to start to ship, and the thing just didn't work. We forgot that it was a complex IT system we needed behind that to process the orders. It wasn't just brochureware. And we messed up pretty badly. We started shipping the wrong people the wrong things. We were shipping people 7 things. I was writing rent checks to people who I had, had their accounts bounced, and it was an absolute mess. We actually got through this, but it was all hands on deck. And it's when I learned this lesson number 3 from Peter Drucker quote, strategies don't move mountains, bulldozers do. If you could have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you can't execute, you're nowhere. If you can't ship the goods, deliver them to your customers, collect the cash, and do that stuff, the greatest strategy in the world simply doesn't matter. And we got everybody in the company involved. We sort of still had an empty floor of our office. We went downstairs. We started shipping for the holidays to anybody we thought remotely might have ordered from us. Free, just to try to earn back those customers that we'd messed up so much. But we recovered from that, and we started selling the visor, and things went pretty well. These are quarterly dollar numbers. If you can't read that scale, in 6 quarters of doing business, we were doing $120 million a quarter, which was pretty spectacular. In fact, it was probably the fastest growth company in the history of American business at that point in time. A pretty stunning story. I'm now famous again, back on covers, serving as the icon for things. And, of course, we get a nice new office with lots of room. Then the bubble is continuing. Things are going well. Palm goes public to just amazing valuations, worth more than GM or whatever it was. So we decide you eat while dinner's being served. So we went public as well, raised a lot of money. We had our IPO. I have to tell you, as a side note, that I got married 10 days after we had our IPO. You might ask, how is it possible that you had a road show and planned a wedding and did both those things at the same time? And I say to you, I did what any good CEO would do, is I outsourced the wedding. So I asked my friend Judith to please just organize it all for me. Whatever she picked would be perfectly fine, and I would get the dress, and that would be it. And that's what we did. I said, don't bother me. I don't want to hear about menus, flowers, that stuff. So that's what we did, and it went very well. Probably much better had I been involved in the menus and the flowers. So things are going smashingly. We're the fastest growth company in the history of American business. We're hiring like crazy. There is no space anywhere in the valley. We are in the height of the bubble, and so we get a new building. And we took a lease on a building that was being built in Sunnyvale at the time. It still was like 2 years away from being completed. It was right near the Sunnyvale shops, near the train station. Really great new building. No, actually, I didn't get a lease on 1 new building. I got a lease on 2 new buildings because I knew that we would continue this amazing growth. I wanted a campus environment that we could grow into over the years, and I knew that any excess space we had early on, we could sublease in this amazing environment. So this gave us the opportunity to grow in one big space together. 350,000 square feet. We'll get back to this. Signed that lease. Ink was drying just as the bubble burst. So height of the market, height of the rental costs in the valley, and then things start crashing around us. Next thing that happens is Palm ships a new product. Actually, they pre-announce a product, the M505, and then are unable to ship it. So in the meantime, everybody stopped buying their old product. Their new product's coming. The old product starts piling up in great numbers. At the exact same time, demand has slowed from doubling 5 years in a row to flat overnight because the bubbles burst. So there's this huge glut of Palm product, just a huge glut of Palm product. In the meantime, we have our own product problems. We bring out our new product, Visor Edge. It was sort of a new shape. You can see it on the right there, edgy, cool. Unfortunately, we missed a major technology transition, which was the move to color screens on the high end. This was sort of the last expensive monochrome product, and nobody wanted it. So we had thought we would have as much of a success as we would on the low end, so we had an awful lot of these Visor Edge products around as well. So things all happened at the same time. Palm's bad product transition, our failed product, the economy's collapsing around us, and guess what? We'd signed this new substantial lease debt. So things are looking bad again. Now, if you look at sort of what our original strategy had been, it had been we were going to do these handheld computers, these organizers as we called them. We knew how to do those. We were getting them in the market fast. They were going to generate the cash. But our long-term goal was always to create these communicators. And so that was the grand strategy. At that point, I learned lesson number 4, which I think is my most important lesson: ignore sunk costs. This is not obvious to you what this means. This is not intuitive at all. But basically what this says is, just because you've been doing something that was the right thing at the time doesn't mean it's the right thing to keep on doing. And just because you've invested in the past, it's not necessarily the right thing to keep investing in. And we looked at our situation, and we had to make a very, very big decision. We'd been investing in these visors. We'd done very well. We'd built some brand. We had this huge success, as I showed you. But we knew that wasn't the future for us because the market had really stalled. Palm and Sony were there. They were clearly both going to be bigger than Handspring. We were going to be number 3 in a dying market, which was not a good position to be in. Yet nobody was really exploiting these communicators. We'd been dabbling in it, trying to build our knowledge. We were ready to start building products in it. And we felt that we had the opportunity to lead in that market, whereas we would only have the opportunity to be number 3 in the other market. So even though that was where we'd invested all of our money, and that's how everybody knew us at the time, we made the very courageous decision to stop investing in the Visor product line. We continued to sell, and we continued to, sell what we had in the market, but we killed all of our R&D projects on it, and that's one of the hardest decisions you can make is to kill an R&D project. But we decided with the limited funds we had to invest in the future and not the past. So in 2001, we shipped our first Trio. I brought one of these along, too. Some of you here, I know, were early adopters of this product. And we called it Trio because it was 3 things in one. It was a great phone, first and foremost. It was a Palm OS organizer, so it did everything the other ones could do, and it handled wireless data. And we shipped this product, and we did pretty well. In fact, if you looked at our sales of just our communicator products, we were doing $35 million a quarter in the fourth quarter. Now, if this was a standalone business, I imagine many of you who start businesses would like to have a track record like this of $30 million a quarter, the fourth quarter of doing business. So, right, Garth? Not bad, huh? Okay. So, anyway, then I ran into Gordon Eubanks, who said the following, my lesson 5, manage by how things are, not how you wish they were. And instead, this is really where we were, is that we'd stop investing in the organizers, which had fallen off spectacularly quickly, far faster than we ever could have imagined. The communicators at the same time were growing a lot more slowly than we had hoped. And in reality, this was how we were doing, which looks eerily similar to that 3Com chart I showed you earlier. So now we're in survival plan. So from cover girl to survival plan, we had to restructure the company from 450 to 250 people. We decided that broke my heart. These were people who helped us build this tremendous success and were really top-notch. We had to focus on the Trio. We had to get out of this lease. This lease was going to crush us. This debt was crushing relative to the scale of our company. I negotiated a $76 million payment out of this lease. Now, there's not many people can stand in front of you and say they made a $76 million mistake. However, that's not what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is I made a $350 million mistake that I got out of for $76 million. But that pretty much depleted our capital, that $76 million. But if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been able to raise money, sell the company. We wouldn't have been able to do anything. We had to get rid of that debt. And so now we had to raise money because that really hurt the company. That crippled the company. And, of course, I had learned my lesson number 2, and this time I learned to row with both paddles. I started pursuing a financing, and we started pursuing potential acquisitions. Palm had approached us. We talked to several other potential acquirers. And what we did was we played these two scenarios off each other. So we managed to get a financing together. Then we'd go to, Palm and say, well, we have a financing. You got to make the deal better. They'd make the deal better. Then we'd go to the financiers and say, look, we got an acquirer, so you got to make the financing better if you want us to do it. So, we went and we played the two off of each other, which is a much better way to do things. And we ended up with what we thought was a pretty attractive deal to merge with Palm. We got our shareholders, Handspring shareholders, got roughly a third of that company, while we represented at the time maybe 10% of the revenue or 10% of the cash on pretty much any measure. So on pretty much any measure, it was a good win for our shareholders. And the real reason we did that deal was that we had complementary companies at that point in time. They were still the leader in handhelds. They'd done a great job of continuing to invest in the handhelds and being a leader. We had gotten out of the handhelds, so we were not overlapping with them anymore. They had done nothing, however, in communications, and we were quickly becoming one of the leaders in this communication. So it was sort of like they had the scale and we had the future. So we put these things together. They're very complementary. We believe and continue to believed at the time and continue to believe that this handheld computing is also the future of personal communications, and that these things are really coming together, both computing and communications, in one device. And I'm just, convinced that all phones in the future are going to be smartphones with platforms, ability to add software, do your email, and all those things. So we believe this together as we merge the company. In 2003, we launched the Trio 600. Any Trios out there? Trio owners? Oh, I love it. Very good. Thank you. And that's www.palm1.com for those of you who want to join your colleagues here. We launched the Trio 600 in 2003. We last fall launched the 650. But really a breakthrough new form factor in smartphones, a lot smaller, and we think has become really as iconic as the Palm Pilot and the Palm 5 was in the Palm world, is the 650 and the 600. In the future, you're going to see these ubiquitous voice and data networks. This has already happened, data over all the voice networks. Just by contrast, when we did the Palm 7 at Palm, the voice networks didn't support data at that time. So we did the Palm 7 on a data-only network, and that simply didn't have the right cost structures and the right coverage profile as the voice networks did. But in that time, there's been this massive change in the infrastructure with these ubiquitous voice and data networks. These devices are getting better and better. The 650 has a more beautiful color display than the 600. The displays just keep getting better. Incredible application development environment. You can use them all over the world. They're really an incredible experience. But one of the things I'm most proud of these handhelds is the opportunity that they've had to make an impact around the world. This thing is really expensive as a phone. Let's face it, it's an expensive phone. However, it's really cheap as a computer, particularly when you realize that computers plugged into a wall with an IT department to support them carry a lot of other costs associated with them. And to me, one of the most compelling things has been to watch some of the experimentation going on around the world, particularly in lesser developed areas of the world, with these products. These are all real examples. These are doctors in Lithuania checking drug database information on the web with these products, a farmer in Senegal on the right checking pricing of commodities. The bottom two are micro lenders in Latin America who I had the opportunity to visit, who've deployed Palm Pilots and now Trios throughout their lenders to go out in the field and qualify micro loans of $100 type loans. So really see compelling things happening. In fact, if I look back at my almost 25 years in this industry, I feel like, to me, it's been a long continuum of doing the same thing, which is making computing tools more and more broadly available to more and more people at lower and lower price points. So it's been a compelling thing to be a part of for my career. So those are the lessons. It's all about the team. You knew that, but I'll bet you a lot of you continue to, those of you in organizations today, continue to have people who are underperforming in your organization, and you take much too long to do something about it. We all do, but you've got to make sure that you've got the right team. You can't row straight with only one paddle. Make sure you've got multiple options. It makes your other options much stronger. Strategies don't move mountains. Bulldozers do. Get the details right. The spec sheets have to be right. The spreadsheets have to foot. Get the details right. Ignore sunk costs. if you learn nothing else from this speech, please learn this one point. Get up every morning and say to yourself, what am I doing today, and is it the right thing to be doing for today, irrespective of what I did yesterday? Doesn't mean what you did yesterday is wrong. It just means that it might have been right for yesterday, and it's not right for today. Am I working on the right projects? Am I investing in the right things? And then finally, manage by how things are, not how you wish they were. Be realistic. Get as much feedback you can from people outside of you. You get blinders on in what you're doing to make sure you're being realistic. So those are my lessons. And, of course, as you know, I have no doubts that this new market is indeed the mother of all markets. Thank you very much.